Genesis 29 is where we're going. We're going to finish up a little bit. We were talking about giving and all that the last time. And this was R.G. Letourneau, the guy we were talking about. And one of the things he says is, I shovel money out and God shovels it back, and God has a bigger shovel. You know, he's the guy who said last week he gave 90% of his income to God and kept 10%. And yet became a multimillionaire. Had 300 patents in his name. And a lot of those patents were worth an enormous amount of money for the things that he invented and sold to other people. And we left off, now I don't have my script here, it's a verse, where was it? Okay, I can't ever find my mouse when I do this. It's somewhere. Anybody see a mouse moving around? Oh, there, I could bait it to the next. Well, we'll just go there. God wants us to be a cheerful giver. Remember, it says that God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. That's the tail end of the passage that says God will give back, pressed down, shaken together, running over into your lap. And then it tells us in the end of that passage why he does this. Not so that we can spend it on ourselves, not so that we can consume it all, but he says right there, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. That's the point. We give. Sorry.
What scripture was that?
I forgot because I only took half of it on this note. Oh, and I don't have it in my. I might have it as an old too. Because I did a lot of different stuff. I believe it's Luke 6:38. Because that's pressed down, shaken together. Luke 6:38.
6:38.
Yep.
Nice. I've been thinking about that for the past few weeks.
So, anyway, and that's something that we Christians all the time miss and don't understand is when God gives, he gives us enough to take care of us and extra to take care of other people, not extra to spend it on us, that type of thing. And then we give, and then he gives more. But if you go into the idea, well, if I give, God will give me more, you're already in trouble. You just give because you love God and you're a cheerful giver, and then God replaces what you give for you. And remember we said last time, it's not necessarily all to the church. You should give to your church, but also to other ministries, to missions, to individuals. You know, now when you go to individuals, that's what the passage in the Bible says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. They tell you to do it anonymously, because it can make people feel really strange if they know you did it, and it can cause all kinds of stuff. It's much better if nobody knows where it came from. You know? And if you want to give to an individual, a lot of times it's good to go to somebody else and tell them to give it to them, and tell them they can't tell them where it came from, that kind of thing.
What about to the poor?
Well, if God brings you someone, that's the point. Whoever God puts on your heart to give to, give to.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. If God puts them on your heart.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not because they're for the Walmart with a sign.
I've been going through that, and I feel it's almost like, I mean, I'm testing it, you know, and it's like when I don't feel like it, it just doesn't feel right. So, but when I feel like, just get up and go, do it, and I do it.
You know, people, and God will bring us people with legitimate needs. Too many of the people that stand around in a place like Walmart, that's just how they earn a living. I've dealt with this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times as a pastor. 90% of the people out there doing stuff like that are scamming. You know, it's just how they earn a living, or how they travel. They'll get churches to pay for hotel rooms and gas and meals, and really they're just having a vacation traveling across the country. You know, Calvin.
Didn't someone follow one of the guys that had the signs?
Oh yeah, that's been done several times. In California, there was a guy years ago sitting in an intersection, you know, we'll work for food kind of thing. And a camera crew went and watched him. And at the end of the day, this guy goes down the side street and walks up to a really expensive BMW SUV, reaches inside, gets out nice clothes, takes his dirty clothes off, puts his nice clothes on, and then they followed him and looked, and this guy was making hundreds of dollars a day, easily, making as much as most people working a full-time job, sitting on that corner. You know, and you'll find there's a lot of people that do that. You know, there are people, and the hard part is separating those in need from those that aren't. We have to be careful because we can use up all our resources on people that are scamming, as opposed to people who really need it. That's why I said God will put it on your heart. He'll burden you with this person, this mission, whatever. And that's where we go. And the rest, we don't really worry about. And as I said last week, sometimes we can give too much to individuals and we can interrupt what God's trying to do in their life. Because a lot of times, you know how we humans are, God often has to take us down till we got nothing before we'll listen and change and start changing our lives and stuff. And sometimes He's doing that and we intervene and we short circuit what God's trying to do. That's why I said the most important thing is seek God, tell Him to make you aware of whatever He wants you to give to, and then do it. But only those that God says, here, whatever. So, okay. So the whole point of all of that was to give with a cheerful heart. That's what God says in the New Testament. Doesn't give you a specific amount, none of that. It says, give as you've been blessed and give with a cheerful heart. And the sad part is, if we went around to most churches and looked at their offering, we'd say, man, not many people in this church are being blessed. Because you know what the average is of giving across churches? And it's been the same for 200 years, 2.9%. And what that actually means is there's a small group of people giving 10, 20, 30%, and a whole bunch of others giving less than 1%. But the old adage that's always stuck true in churches is 20% of the people do 80% of the work and give 80% of the money. And that's pretty true across denominations and all that kind of thing. You'll find some examples where it's not, but it's very, very true. 30 years ago, there was an economist, a female economist, that all she did was she said, we've got statistics that say how many people say that they believe in God and go to church most weekends, like 50 weeks a year or something like that. So these aren't people who just say they're Christians. And then they calculated using the average income across America. And they said if all the Christians, people who claim to be Christians and go to church, gave just 10%, the churches would have to try to deal with an extra $131 billion. In fact, she said the biggest problem in the modern church would be what do we do with the money? We've got so much money coming in. That's just if they gave 10%. We'd be able to run all of the different ministries that the government tries to do and does such a horrible job at, and the churches tend to do a much better job at, and yet we don't because we don't have the money, is what happens. So, but the point is, be a cheerful giver. Whatever God puts on your heart, and God will make sure you have enough. All right, Genesis 29:1. Remember, Jacob is on his way to Haran in order to find him a wife, but mostly to get away from Esau, who wants to kill him. So it's a good idea to leave. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in a field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. So here we have where Jacob's starting out is down here by Bethel. That's where he had the experience with God. And that's where he's going, is Haran. That's where the rest of Abraham's family is, so he can get a wife from his own lineage. It's going to end up being his cousin, just like his father Isaac married a cousin during that time. Now, when he gets there, I mean, he just is wandering. He just walked into this area, following the road. He sees a bunch of shepherds in a well, and walks up and begins talking to them. And he sees this is what he's talking about, a well with a stone plug to keep the water from evaporating and to keep animals from falling in it and dying and polluting the water and that type of thing. And so that stone had to be moved. I think it was much bigger than this stone. That stone had to be moved in order for the shepherds to get water. The stone was so big, though, that it took a bunch of them to move it. Okay, and you'll see that as we kind of go on in this. So let's see. It took many shepherds to roll it away. Therefore, what happens is, we'll see in a minute, is that the shepherds have to wait until they're all there and they've got enough men to push the stone off in order to water the sheep. Okay? There are at least 3 already, because he saw 3 flocks, yet they can't move the stone. That's why this is midday. Where should they be midday with their sheep? In the pasture. They should be out eating. We generally get water in the morning and the evening. After they're up for all night and before they go into the pens at night. These guys are standing around in midday And the sheep aren't out eating nor drinking, which is not good for the sheep at all. Okay? Well, let's see. Now pay attention to the details like that. The 3 shepherds. There's a reason God says 3 flocks, because of what's coming next. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." Surprise, surprise, he accidentally runs into guys from Haran, which is where he's from, right? "We are from Haran," he said to them. "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." So what are the odds in the middle of nowhere you run into shepherds who are from Haran who know your uncle? Sound like you've been guided there? Okay. "We know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well. And see, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep." So they're all there waiting for other guys to show up. They're not well coordinated here. Those people aren't showing up in order to get the stone rolled away. You know, surprise, surprise, they're from Haran. Surprise, surprise, they know his uncle. Surprise, surprise, here comes Rachel, his daughter. And we'll see in a minute that as soon as he sees Rachel, he's toast. He's done. That's the woman for him. I mean, this is one of those love at first sight kind of things. You know, he sees her, he's like, that's the one. That's it. Okay? Now, it was a common in this time for a young unmarried daughter to tend the flocks, especially if you didn't have enough sons. Then the unmarried daughters would also tend the flocks and go out in the fields. And that's what Rachel's doing. And I think it's interesting, even in these very wealthy families, Laban is very wealthy, Abraham is very wealthy, Isaac is very wealthy, but their kids all work. They all have jobs to do. Get water, take care of the sheep. You know, they don't sit around like rich kids of modern people do. They had to work just like everybody else. You know, and which builds character, and they learn how to take care of the business their parents are in, whatever the case may be. Now, in verse 7, we begin to see a part of Jacob we haven't been told about yet. And it's going to play an important part from this point forward. And all we know about Jacob is he liked to hang around the tents. Remember, that's what it said? Esau was a man in the fields. He hunted, you know, that type of thing. And Jacob hung around the fence. And we're going to find out here that Jacob has a real passion and a real desire to care for animals. He's a good husbandman, as they call him. He's a good shepherd. Because look at what he says. When he gets there, the first thing he says is, "What are you guys doing? Go take the sheep out and get them to pasture." You know, I'm kind of surprised they didn't say, "What business is it of yours?" You know, they're not your sheep. They're our sheep. But there's some other things in there that are important. So he asked them, "Why are you here? Why aren't you out?" You know, and they said, "Because we can't roll the stone away." What I find interesting is this is Jacob, the guy in the background most of the time. Now all of a sudden he speaks with a tone of authority. He starts telling these shepherds what to do. And it's like they're listening to him. You know, he tells them, "Take them out to pasture." And they say, "We can't." You know, they don't say, "We don't really care who you are, go away." They say, "We can't because we need to water them before we go out to pasture," which is true. So it gives us an idea that he does really care about taking care of the animals. And he's very good at it. And we'll find that as we go on with Laban. Like I said, the sheep were only watered in the morning and the evening. In the evening, they'd be gathered together where they would be pinned up in one pen. All the sheep. Like there might be 10 shepherds that meet in one place at the end of the day, and all of the sheep would go into a single pen. Because that's way easier than building a whole bunch of individual pens to put these sheep in.
How do you know who's sheep then?
That's where we're going. There's a verse in the Bible that says that. Jesus uses this as an example of who he is. In John 10, I don't have the scripture up, but remember in John 10, he says, "My sheep know my voice. I call them and they come." And see, that's what these shepherds could do. They lived with these sheep 24/7 for years at a time. So they would just go up and you just call your sheep by name. Your sheep would come out and go with you, and none of the other sheep would. And that's how it worked. And every shepherd could do it.
Wait, didn't if like a sheep didn't listen or something and got away, didn't the shepherds break its leg and put it on its shoulders or
Well,
something?
shepherds would take them and put them on their shoulders to carry them back. Yes, that they would do if a sheep wandered off. Unfortunately, we kind of turned sheep into the dumbest animals on the earth. They can't take care of themselves. They can't find water. On other stuff that wild animals can do. The shepherd has to take them to water. They're scared of everything. And they have no defenses against anything. That's why we have to have sheepdogs and all that kind of thing.
Are we referred to as sheep?
It's a very important comparison. God took the dumbest animal that has and said, sure, let's sheep. So yes, that should put us in the right frame of mind to understand. It's a good point. So, and also they would gather them together at night because that way all the shepherds could watch and guard, and it's much easier that way. And to this day, those pens still exist all over the land of Israel. They're just stone, stacked stone pens. And a lot of times they don't even have a gate. The shepherds would sleep across the entrance. And Jesus brings that up too. He even says, I am the gate. He says, I am the way. And they would sleep across it so no animal could get in. They'd have to go through them, or a robber, or whatever the case may be. So, let's see. So the shepherds respond to Jacob's command that they can't water the sheep. Got to get enough men to move the rock. So therefore, this must have been a really big rock that 3 men can't move it. So they've probably been there since sunup waiting for the others to show up so they can move the rock and get on with business, type of thing. So let's look at verse 9. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father.
If he was able to roll the stone away by himself, doesn't that mean he's incredibly strong?
We're getting there. Absolutely. So here comes Rachel. Now I'm not sure which he's more interested in, Rachel or the sheep. Maybe they're rich, But it's Rachel. He's madly in love with her. He's smitten the moment he sees her. And then, of course, what does a man want to do who's smitten with a woman? Impress her. So he walks up to this huge stone and moves it. 3 men couldn't move it. From what we've learned of Jacob previously, he's not a particularly robust man. Esau was, but Jacob was the one who liked to hang around in the tents. And so what we're finding here is when he had his encounter with God, God said, I'll take care of you, protect you, bring you through all these things, and bring you back to the land, all that stuff. And this is the first example of what God's doing. He gave him strength like Samson. He was able to move the stone. He had superhuman strength. And that's one of those details we can blow right by reading the Bible. That he walked up and moved the stone that 3 men couldn't move.
I bet their shepherds were like
Yep.
freaking out.
Also, that's a great way for him to be known in the community. That's the guy that rolled the stone by himself. Don't mess with him.
Right.
Kind of thing. So he's also a little adrenaline there because he's trying to impress Rachel at the same time. So he can water her flocks. So this is an example of God being with him. And it's one of the first concrete pieces of evidence he's had since he had that experience with God down at Bethel. So he not only moves the stone, what else does he do? He waters the sheep. And I looked it up. The average sheep, a sheep drink approximately a gallon of water at a time. And if Rachel only had 100 sheep, that's 100 gallons of water that you got to get out of that well, pull up out of that well and dump into troughs. And that's a lot of water, And yet he was willing to do it. Here's the big point of all of this, though. We're beginning to see a massive change in who Jacob is. Before Bethel, he's the cheater, the trickster, the grasper, the guy who cheated Esau out of his birthright and cheated his father to give him the blessing instead of Esau. Who does he think about the most? That's right. So what needs did Jacob think about before his encounter with God? Jacob's needs. That's it. Okay? But now whose needs is he thinking about? Rachel, other people, the sheep, all of that. So we begin to see this tremendous change that God is bringing in Jacob to make him the father of Israel. And so he's got to move from where he was to where God wants him to be. So he is thinking of other people now. He's a hard worker, that kind of thing. Now he's overcome with emotion. It tells us that he begins to weep out loud. Do men normally weep out loud? No. Yet he does. So we're going to ask ourselves, why? What's he crying about? You know, everything's going well. What's he crying about? What he's crying about is the fact that God has guided him exactly as he said he would. I mean, not a week or a year or whatever later. The day he walks into the area, he finds shepherds from Haran who know Laban, who also, here comes Rachel, it's all laid out for him. And so that's God keeping his promise. And then gives him the strength to be able to move that stone as well.
Did he go through very difficult periods? It's like before that?
Before that? You mean like Esau wanting to kill him?
Oh, yeah, that's one.
Yeah, he did. So, you know, God's working, orchestrating all of it, and he sees that, and he sees the power of God, and also that God's keeping his promise. Now, so this is tremendous verification of what God told him he would do. Now, after Jacob identifies himself, she takes off to go tell her father, Laban, about it. And I'm pretty sure she knows he wants to marry her, because why else would he be there other than looking for a wife? And remember, it also tells us, that he kissed her, which was probably the normal Middle Eastern kiss on each cheek kind of thing as well. But I'm pretty sure most women can tell when a man is totally smitten with them pretty easily. So she goes to tell Dad, you know, there's a guy, because I mean, think of these poor women, they're in a place where there are not a lot of men from their lineage to marry, you know, and he has to travel from way down in Israel to come up there to marry. So let's see. It's interesting that remember when Eliezer, Abraham's head servant, the manager of all of his property, went looking for a wife for Isaac, where did he find her? At a well. Okay? What's interesting here is, where does Jacob find Rachel?
At a well.
At a well. Now, I can't tell you why, but there's something about wives and wells. Because that's where God sent them both to find their wife. Was at a well. You know? So it's also interesting to me that, remember, Eliezer prayed for a sign of the woman that God wanted to marry Isaac. Remember, he said, she'll water my camels. And she did. And then here, in this one, it's Jacob who's watering the sheep for Rachel. It's kind of the same dynamic, it's just switched from man to woman. But I find that very interesting. He's willing to serve her. You know, that type of thing. So, Genesis 29:13.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What do you mean he was willing to serve her?
Watered her sheep. He's a man. She's a woman. In their culture, what would you normally do? She'd water your sheep if you had any. But instead, he waters. I mean, he could have rolled the stone and said, here's your water. But he doesn't. He waters her sheep. Partly because he's smitten with her. As most women know, men will do a lot of stuff when they're dating. Some of that disappears after they get married.
It'd be nice to know what's going to disappear, so what happens.
You know? So, all right, verse 13. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Same idea, kiss on both cheeks. Jacob told Laban all these things. He told him everything that's happened and what God said to him. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him a month. And surely you're my relative. Surely you're part of my family. All that kind of thing. And so he came around. You know, and he stays with him a month. Now, in those days, you know how in today's world we say that visitors at your house are like fish? They start to stink after 3 days. That seems to be a universal thing. Because back then, if you stayed with relatives like that, after 3 days, you were expected to begin working if you were going to stay there. They didn't allow for freeloaders of any kind, anywhere, anytime. You had to go out and help with the sheep or whatever. But you needed to earn your keep, not be a drag on the family. And so he would start working for him, mainly because he wants to hang around Rachel. You know, and that's why he stays as long as he does, and he's happy to work while he's doing it. And there's probably no agreement for wages or anything. He just stayed 3 days and then started helping. And so they're going to have to work that out, and we'll see that happens in the next passages.
So that was really clear in the whole, with all the people there, it was very clear that idea or rule. If you stay there more than 3 days, you work.
Yeah, absolutely. It was their custom. It was known across the area, that type of thing. And you find throughout the Bible, it allows for no slackers anywhere. Read the book of Proverbs. A huge chunk of the book of Proverbs is about don't be a slacker. Don't be a sluggard. You know, that's how you end up poor and all kinds of things. In the New Testament, it says if you don't work, you don't eat. That's right. You don't eat. In the story, if you're able to work. The only people that early church fed were people who could not take care of themselves. Widows and orphans. And if you think it's, go and read in the New Testament the requirements for a widow to get food from the church are very strict. She has to be a member that participates, that takes care of other people, all this kind of stuff. She has to be beyond a certain age, because if she's still young, the Bible tells her marry another man. You know, you're not going to be a drain on the church's resources. And it was very strict. It's not like today where someone says, give me money, and we give them money. You know, it was much more difficult back then.
Well, I like that idea, the way it was. Because everybody participates.
In fact, the New Testament gets so strict, it says that a man who won't work and take care of his family is worse than an infidel. That means you're worse than an unsaved person. That's what God says, if you won't work and take care of your family. That is about the worst thing you can possibly say about you by God. And that's amazing he connects those together. And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of that in modern days. You know, we want to be compassionate, absolutely, but we also need to be careful of what we do. So, let's see. Genesis 29:15. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. So he's been working for a month, 27 days of that, and 3 days he got to stay for free. They never made an agreement as to what he should get paid, and so Laban says, you need to get some kind of wages. What do you want? My guess is Laban already had a pretty darn good idea of what he wanted. That would be relatively obvious. And so I think Laban's going, I can get some free labor out of this guy for this daughter I don't need. You know, because they didn't look on daughters with too much favor back then. They considered more of a drain than an asset. You know, men were assets. So Laban asked him to set the wages, what they should be, and he does in a minute. It tells us that Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. And I looked in many places. We don't really know what that means. We don't know what it means by her eyes were weak. You know, I always kind of thought she was probably like nearsighted. But I mean, how would you know that? Well, maybe she walked into things, I don't know, you know, that kind of thing. But I think it has a different meaning than that. And, you know, and the only way we can tell as we go here is when you go to the context. The context will help me understand what it means by weak eyes. Because it's comparing Leah and Rachel. Leah has weak eyes. What does Rachel have? She's beautiful in form and appearance. So if they're being contrasted, what does that say about Leah? She's not beautiful in form and appearance. There's something wrong with her eyes. You know, maybe they're crossed. I don't know. You know, or maybe she's one of those people who has a wandering eye. While you're talking to them, you don't know which eye to look at. You know, kind of thing. Who knows? All we know is she's not attractive. Rachel is. That's really the point. It's kind of like what we would do in modern times, where let's see. Another translation says tender eyes, and I don't know what that means either. But say there's 2 sisters, Esmeralda and Marie, where Esmeralda is gorgeous and Marie isn't. Somebody would come to Esmeralda and say, you're so pretty, and they see Maria there, who's not pretty, they say, well, you have such nice eyes. You know, we call that a backhanded comment, you know, kind of thing. So it's kind of along those lines. So Jacob is not interested in Leah at all. Doesn't care. He's smitten with Rachel, that's it. Now, the interesting thing is that Laban lets him set the price. I think I'd have said 1 year, not 7 years. That's a long time to work for your bride, you know? And we're not told why 7. A good guess is that 7 means completeness of the Bible, the number of God, perfection, those kinds of things. And so it's a way, symbolically, that he could be saying, I'm going to pay the full price, the complete price for her. Again, stating how much he cares for her, that type of thing.
She
So,
may not look the same in 7 years.
what's that?
She may not look the same in 7 years.
He's waiting to see. I changed my mind. Yeah. Now, let's see. Now we can see problems coming in the future for Jacob because most of us know what's going to happen. He's already in love with Rachel. And what comes next isn't going to go very well, as you'll see. Verse 19, Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Well, that's quite the compliment. Better give her to you than anybody else, so take her. I mean, you can take it 2 ways. We could say, you're better than the rest of these guys, so she's good. Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Time just flew by. Okay? Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed. Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. So what's Laban doing?
Sounds a little weird to me.
He's being sneaky.
Yeah.
And what is Jacob known for doing? Being sneaky.
So,
So the two master sneakies are now going to be dealing with each other. They're both trying to cheat each other and so on and so forth.
Oh, wow.
Jacob's about to learn a lesson about how he treated other people. Okay? So Jacob's a man of his word. He worked 7 years with no wages other than, room and board and the fact that he can marry Rachel. Didn't complain, did his work well. In fact, you'll see as we keep going in Genesis, as long as Jacob was taking care of the flocks, Laban's flocks grew like crazy. Every female had a baby, every baby lived, none died, none got diseased, and they grew like mad. So what's Laban going to want?
Getting rich.
He was going to want Jacob to stay around for a long, long, long time, and that may be a big part of why he slips Leah in. Because he knows he's not after Leah, he's after Rachel. And so what can he get out of Jacob if he gives her Leah first?
Another 7.
Another 7 years. Absolutely. Laban and Jacob are so similar in personalities. And God brought him there, I think a big part of it was for him to see what he was like by looking at Laban. And that can have a huge impact on us. When we see someone, I don't know, sometimes, I don't know if you ever had this happen to you, but someone tell you just like so-and-so, and you get furious. I am not! It's like, yeah, you are. Kind of thing. So, now I find this interesting that he slips her in there. And I'm also amazed that, that Jacob didn't realize who it was. Now I know it's dark and all of that, but most likely it was because, she was veiled. He didn't see her until after the ceremony. By the time they went into the marital bedroom, Jacob may have had a lot to drink because they had wine and they're celebrating. And because I thought, well, he'd at least recognize her voice, wouldn't he? And say, this isn't Rachel. But he doesn't. It's not till the next morning when the sun comes out that he goes, wow, who are you? So, but see, they were veiled something like this where you couldn't see him and you didn't know who you were marrying until after, you wake up the next morning. Did you know there was usually the parents and others who stood outside the tent and listened to make sure they consummated the marriage? How would you like that? Talk about performance anxiety. Everybody's out there listening. So, the cheater or trickster has met his match in Laban. But this is all part of God's plan to change Jacob for the better. He's going to experience what he does to others. And if this happens to us, it usually has a profound effect. When we experience something we have done to others, that really brings it home, doesn't it? And that's usually when we'll decide we're going to change or whatever the case may be. Okay, verse 24. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? What is Jacob's name? The deceiver? And then he's like, why have you deceived me? It's like, hello. Laban said, it is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. So what does Laban do? Instead of taking responsibility, he just goes, well, it's not our custom. Wouldn't that have been something you told him up front when he asked for Rachel? You'd have said, well, that's not our custom. We have to marry the older first and then the younger, which was the custom, but it wasn't ironclad.
Right.
Okay? So, verse 27, you can see, I think you can see where Laban's going because he's already thought this out. Complete the week of this one, Rachel. See, we call it a week, 7 days, 7 years. Of this one, we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. So, girl Jacob meets his match. And it doesn't stop here. It keeps going on. You'll see as we go through this battle of wits between Laban and Jacob as to who's taking advantage of who, kind of thing. It's kind of interesting, but I think Jacob learns a lot during this time. So I can't imagine being Jacob. You wake up in the morning, you roll over, and Leah's staring at you, not Rachel. And you're like, what? Kind of thing. And he goes running, he's mad, of course, but it's too late. They're married, and you can't undo it. So he confronts him, and he just realizes, it's the customs of our country. If he was an honorable man, he'd have told him up front. Yeah. So Jacob could then decide what he wanted to do. But he didn't. And so David doesn't want this whole thing with his flocks to end. As long as Jacob's there, he's getting richer and richer. Now, we also see the depth of his love for Rachel. My gosh, this guy already worked 7 years for free. Now he's going to work another. That's 14 years to get your wife.
Oh, my God.
I think I would have eloped, thrown on a camel and headed out of town. But he sticks it out.
Are you all right?
Because he really loved her, I guess.
He did.
That's pretty intense.
Now that shows that Jacob's a man of his word. He accepts what happened to him, and he says, okay, I'll work another 7 years. Now, another very important thing here is, this is one of the first instances where we find when the Bible says a week, it can mean 7 years. That's important because of when you get to prophecy. It'll talk about weeks, which mean years. Okay? And so in the Bible, there's multiple places where it'll speak of weeks of years, 7 years. And they'll call it a week. It doesn't mean 7 days, it means 7 years. Like in, I think in Daniel's prophecies it's there, and I think Isaiah too. It'll talk about it.
Did they ever talk about a single week?
What do you mean?
Just 7 days, not 7 years.
Well, yeah, sometimes it's a week of 7 days. But other times it's representing 7 years, depending on the context. Like here, he says a week, but we also know he said 7 years. But no, 7 days would be a week as well. That's why you have to look at the context to understand what they're telling us. So, let's see. Now, I couldn't imagine being poor Leah. In order to get her married, her dad has to trick this guy. Can you imagine what that does to your self-esteem, things like that? They had to trick some dude into marrying you. She's older, and apparently has not had anybody come around that wants to marry her. And it's painful enough that everybody looks at the younger sister to start with. Nobody wants her. And now her dad has to trick him into taking her. Is that going to make a great relationship between Jacob and Leah? No, every time he looks at her, that's the one I got tricked over. You know?
I'm sorry, so what is the point of this whole thing?
What's the point?
Yeah, what's the point of him tricking him? And I don't get it.
Part of the point is that Jacob was the deceiver and the trickster. Now he's had the tables turned. And he experiences what it's like. What's that?
It came back to back.
Yeah, it came back as it always does. It came back to bite him. Remember, God's in the process of molding Jacob into the man who will be the father of Israel.
Oh, that's interesting.
And he's doing what is necessary. He started out with the meeting at Bethel, the dream, the ladder, angels going up and down on the ladder. God has got all power and all the personal relationship and all that stuff. He changed a lot after that. But now God's going to begin working on more of the issues.
So sometimes when you go through things that you can't understand, and it is painful, and it's a long time, it could be God working on you.
Not could be.
It
If
is.
you're a Christian, it is. With Christians, there are no accidents, coincidences, none of that. If we're following God, everything that happens, God says He planned before you were born.
Wow. I
And
never
our only job is to follow Him. That's it. That's really it. As far as our responsibilities, is just follow God. He takes care of everything else. That's why Jesus says, don't worry, don't fret. All those kind of things that He tells us is because we only have one job, follow God. That's it. That's it. Wherever He goes, whatever He asks us to do, follow Him. He says, I'll make sure you have enough. I want to make sure you have enough that you can give to others. And that's all we're supposed to do. Imagine how much anxiety and fear and worry and anger and frustration it would take out of life if we looked at each day as just today I follow God and whatever happens doesn't really matter. Because it's not under my control anyway. And again, we're kind of crazy. What's the only thing we worry about?
Us.
The things we can't do anything about, which is really dumb. We can't do anything about it, so why in the world do we worry about it? Because if we can do something about it, what do?
Got it.
We do it. But we worry about the stuff we have no control over, just kind of like that vicious cycle, you know. And that's why Jesus says, just stop. You know, you can't make yourself a micron taller. You can't add a hair to your head. You can't do anything. For me, that's easy. So why are you worried about the stuff you have no control over? I have control over it, says Jesus. Just follow me. All right? But we like to be in control. That's the big problem. So, let's see. Now, here we have this little weird interlude where we find out Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. Now, remember I told you, whenever the Bible pulls out a name, especially of a woman, and brings it to the front, that means she's very important to some other part of the Bible. Because in that day, number one, women were not more than property, really. Yeah, so when God pulls one out and takes the time to name her and point out who she is or where she's from, those kinds of things, there's meaning there. And it's because Zilpah is going to have some of the sons that are the leaders of Israel. Remember, it's not just Rachel and Leah, the two servants as well, have kids as well. So that's why it happened. Same with Rachel's servant. Sometimes they're called the nurse. She's Bilhah. So it's Zilpah and Bilhah, whose daughter Rachel to be her servant. So then Jacob, after 7 years, when it says went into Rachel, also means he got to go in and sleep with her on their wedding night. Okay? And he loved Rachel more than Leah. Now, isn't that going to be wonderful? Because he's obvious about it. So poor Leah, nobody wanted to marry her. He was forced into marrying her, but he loves Rachel more, and he acts like it. So she's got a pretty miserable life, if you really think about it. You know? So also, Jacob is learning what it's like to be tricked, isn't he? He's also learning something else. Perseverance. 14 years. 14 years of labor. That's perseverance. That's sticking with it. That's character building, isn't it? Absolutely. And we're out of time.